Welcome to Strip Cover Lit. I'm Adrian Fort, and we are here for the first in what I believe will be a 29-part series as we walk chapter by chapter through This Is Not a Writing Manual by Kerri Majors. For this video, we will be looking at the introduction and chapter 1. So, if this is not a writing manual, what is it? Kerri Majors goes on to describe this as therapy for writers. And as far as therapy goes, we get into some smash face therapy right off the bat with these quotes that you've probably heard if you consider yourself a writer. I hope you're planning to marry money. Be sure to find something practical to do, because there's not much money in writing. Grow a thick skin. You should write mysteries. I hear there's money in that. Have you thought about writing romance novels? I hear you can make lots of money with those. Nice work if you can get it. Don't quit your day job. And that's a long road. Now, we have all heard these before if we consider ourselves writers, if writing is something that we take seriously and we've dedicated any particular amount of time to it. But Majors also communicates that, one, these quotes are not quotes that you hear from other writers, not real writers anyway, not people who take their actual writing seriously. And two, all these quotes are true. You do have to have thick skin. You do have to hope to marry money, I suppose. You can't quit your day job, at least not immediately. And it is a long road. It is a very long road. There's a lot of things that go into it. But later on, we get to, that is in the introduction, we get to chapter 1 titled Drafting by a Planner. And we get a neat quote on page 6 that goes as such. Not only does it take guts to write a draft, sometimes in defiance of parents who want you to be a doctor, or a world that tells you the odds are against you, a writer tends to draft from his gut. From that intuitive writer's part of him that speaks, frequently, at inconvenient times, 1 a.m., of inconvenient things, of those parents, maybe, or a lost love. Most people's guts don't take well to being shaped by tools. Guts are inherently wild and free, and when you're writing, they do their best work unbridled. Now, we hear often that revision is the most important part of writing, and I think that here Majors is making a counterclaim to that in the fact that there may be more lifting that goes into subsequent drafts of writing, but it is not necessarily the heaviest lifting. And I think that a very clear case of that, the easiest place to see it is, for example, in fantasy works, fantasy novels, fantasy movies. Think of Star Wars, how much fuel it took to get the engine turning that created Star Wars versus going back and doing the maintenance, the necessary maintenance to keep that thing on the road, right? I think that there's so much more rocket fuel that goes into takeoff than there is in continuing orbit. Later on, page 7, we get the quote, "Don't self-censor, just say it. You can fix, edit, delete, and finesse it later." That's exactly what I learned during all of those afternoons in junior high spent writing my crappy novel about 2 runaways. I wrote because I loved writing. If the first draft is the most strenuous, does take the most energy, does take the most fuel, I think that it should also be the most fun. Look, if you're not having fun writing it, no one's going to have fun reading it, right? And that's something I think it's easy to get lost in when you sit down and you're taking writing seriously. You think you have to be serious in your writing. And I think those are the types of thoughts that spring personalities like Charles Baxter into existence, who no one has ever had fun reading Charles Baxter, and you can tell that Charles Baxter doesn't have fun writing. Maybe that's slanderous, I don't know. And the third thing that I think Kerri Majors tries to communicate in this opening chapter is that discipline is king. There is no excuse and there is no substitute. Majors talks about not having to about this not having to mean daily writing. She suggests rather that you buy a planner and you allot a certain amount of time. You schedule yourself as if it were a job, as if you were a real writer for whom this was a job. And then finally, we get this quote on page 10. I was never going to become a writer unless I protected my schedule. Without the time, there would be no pages. Without the pages, there would be no book deal. And I think this is something that, especially, I won't say for young writers, but new writers, seems very slap in the face. I know it did for me when I was first coming to the realization that, look, you could be Leonardo da Vinci, right? Without an actual product, your genius goes nowhere. You could be William Shakespeare. Unless you write those sonnets, no one is reading them, right? You could be Stephen King. Unless you write that novel, it's not getting published. No one's buying it. So you actually have to, at some point, put the rubber on the road and go. And like she suggests here, the way that she thinks is most suitable is to allot an amount of time. On Monday, I'm going to have 3 hours where I sit down and I write. On Tuesday, it'll only be 30 minutes, but you hold yourself to those numbers. Sometimes I don't think that means we'll get into this later with the questions. So I've got 3 questions that I think are worth asking and answering for yourself, and maybe even plopping into the comments below. What is your flow? How is it that you schedule yourself with writing? I am not normally the standardized time guy. I think that there's several ways that you can do this. For me, the most obvious are standardized time, like she mentions in the book, 2, words per day, and 3, a product a day. Do you want to write a poem a day? Do you want to write a flash fiction every day? Someone had raised the point in one of our previous reviews of Chuck Palahniuk that he tries to write a short story every day. Now, obviously, when you're Chuck Palahniuk, you have that type of time. We don't all have that type of time, but when you read some of Palahniuk's work, it becomes obvious that that may be the case, and that may even be how he works through his novels, because a lot of his novels feel like each chapter could be its own little short story to an extent. For me, like I said, I'm a words per day kind of guy, and right now what that means is I write 500 words a day. On my days off, I write 1,000 words a day. But for me right now, what is helping me is that I will dedicate 300 words to the main short story that I'm writing. Those 300 words will continue, obviously, from the previous day's writing and lead into the next day's writing of that short story, but it allows me to focus on a small portion of writing to really communicate something and not get lost in the words. Right now, I am also outside of that, because it's hard for me to focus on one thing at a time. So if I do that, I start getting other ideas. If I focus on one short story too long, I feel like I'm killing other ideas for myself. So right now, in addition to the 300 words on a single short story that I'm writing, I also dedicate 50 to a flash fiction. And there are at least 3 days a week where I will write a poem. I will force myself to write a poem, even if there's not one in there, which I can then later usually sort of hammer into something that makes a statement, maybe. So right now, I'm the words per day kind of guy. I have done the timed writing thing in the past. I think that all of these methods are useful for writers from time to time. It just depends on where you are in your writerhood. If you are in a place where you don't seem to be having ideas, the time method might work for you especially well, because if I'm in one of those states where I'm not having any ideas, I will sit down to write, and 6 hours later I will have nothing, because I don't have a life. I don't have friends, so I don't go and talk to anyone. So I don't have other engagements besides work, right? I will allow myself to get lost trying to come up with, for example, 500 words of fiction where no stories are available to me. Question two, do you have a planner? Do you have an actual physical planner where you could schedule yourself time to write? I happen to, and I've got all these wonderful colors of pen. These are Pilot G2s. And all those, what do all those colors mean? They all mean something different in my scheduling process, and we can get into those at a later time for a later series. And the third important question that I think you should ask yourself, and maybe even leave a comment in the comment section below, do you remember to have fun with your writing? Sometimes I forget to do so, especially because I take writing so seriously that I end up getting serious with the writing. And it does not come across well. I know that I am writing a story with my voice. I know that I am writing an Adrian Fort short story, poem, flash fiction, novel, when every time, one of the reasons that I do the words per day thing is because if you sit down and just spit it out, you might not communicate a full, rich story. And it's harder to get that in there on the second draft, whereas if you limit yourself to words per day, you take that short story with you everywhere you go during the day. So I know that I'm writing an Adrian Fort short story when I'm at work thinking about that short story and I start grinning like an asshole because there's some little prictitude in that short story that I know I then have to communicate. So if you like this sort of thing, I would appreciate it if you hit the like button. If you have not already, I would appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button as well, because there are more of these types of videos on the way. Like I say, probably 29. There will probably be 29 videos in the This Is Not a Writing Manual thread as we work our way through this, which I've read a little bit ahead of where we're at, and this really seems to be a profitable book for writers in a different way that a lot of writing books are, which is partly why it's called This Is Not a Writing Manual.